Hi, I'm Kyle Ruddy, and I'm here on this session of Talking Code to cover how to get started with the vSphere Automation SDK for Python. So before diving right into the code, let's take a look at what the vSphere Automation SDKs are from a high level. So these are open-sourced software development kits, or SDKs, that are maintained by VMware in order to manage features that are available in the vSphere REST API, as well as VMware Cloud on AWS. The goal of these SDKs are to provide a framework along with a bunch of samples so that consumers can get up and running quickly. The SDKs are available in languages such as Java, Python, Perl, .NET, and Ruby. All of these SDKs are openly available on GitHub, and we very much welcome any community contributions such as pull requests or logged issues. So let's take a look at getting started with the vSphere Automation SDK for Python. So here we are on my macOS system. We're at the vSphere Automation SDKs page. We're going to click on Python to go to the Python SDK repository. Scrolling down a little bit, we can see that there are some things available in the README, such as the Quick Start Guide, links to API documentation, and even how to contribute back samples. We're going to want to clone this locally since we're getting started with it by clicking on Download or Clone, opening up Terminal, changing over to your preferred directory where you clone your repositories locally. In this case, mine is GitHub. And then doing a git clone against that URL. After a couple seconds, you'll have that repository now available locally. Next up is to update the version of Python that's running on your system. So Macs come with 2.7, I believe, and we're going to want to use Python 3. So we're going to use Homebrew, which is a package manager, to install Python. You can use whichever package manager you prefer. However, my preference is obviously Homebrew. So now that Homebrew is installed, we can do brew install Python 3. Homebrew is going to go out, grab and download any of the requisite software that we need, and install it so that we have it available. In this case, we're going to install Python 3.6.3. So there we go, we're all set, ready to go. Now we want to create our virtual environment. So clearing out our terminal screen, heading over to where I store my virtual environments, which is Documents, VNVs, and creating it by specifying Python 3 and creating a SDK demo virtual environment. Then going to activate it by source SDK demo bin activate, and then head back to our Python SDK repository. At this point, we'll use pip3 to install all of our requirements, specifying the requirements txt and the extra support URL. So this is now downloading all the prereqs for the SDK itself. So this is going to download things like pyvmami and anything else that are required. After a couple seconds, we're pretty much ready to roll. One last thing that we need to do before we actually run a command is start by updating our Python path. So we're doing that, specifying pwd and updating the Python path that was already available. Then we need to update our configuration file that's a part of the Python SDK. Opening up an IDE, in this case Visual Studio Code, going out to where we downloaded the repository, going through samples, vSphere, vCenter, and then setup, there's a testbed file that we're going to want to open and update. The big one there is the server. We're going to specify our vCenter server as well as the credentials there for administrator and the password. Next up, we want to update the VM data center name and data store name, since we're going to create a VM as our example. Then a couple of the other things that we'll see later on when we example the call itself, VM folder 2, and then, why not? Let's update the VM name to show that we did in fact do something. So now we're going to call Python and then call out the complete directory to the create default VM. It's going to spit out the configuration spec based upon everything that we put into that configuration file. And then here we can see our configured VM that we just created with a single line of code and just those couple parameters that we updated in the testbed file. So we can see our VM is called SDK demo VM, VM ID of VM147. We can see that it created a disk on our behalf on our vSAN data store. It's guest OS type Windows 9, which was hard-coded in, given it a name, SCSI adapter, and so on and so forth. So now let's go back to our IDE here and examine out the command that we just ran. So stepping up a level into vCenter, then VM create, and opening up the create default VM file. So this is what we just ran. So this does everything from connecting to the vCenter server itself, which we can see there by the server or service manager there, and then specifying our arguments such as server, username, password that we specified in our testbed file. And then we can see where or why we updated those other values in the testbed file, such as VM data center, data store, etc. So then here, starting at line 91, we can see the create spec. So that's where we put in just the bare minimums that we need to create a default VM, which is going to be the guest OS type and the placement, which were those things that I referenced earlier. Then lastly, we can see our create, which is on line 99, which references that create spec, which was output on the screen earlier on our Python screen. And then lastly, it's returning back the full information or performing a get against the API for that VM that we just created. So there's a pretty quick sample on how you can get started with this vSphere Automation SDK for Python. So in just a few minutes, we were able to download the SDK, install all the prerequisites, and create a VM. More information about these SDKs are available at vmware.github.io/vSphere Automation SDK. Thank you.